Leona had always felt a sense of restlessness. No matter how much she tried to settle into her small, peaceful village, a nagging thought tugged at her, refusing to be ignored. It whispered to her in the quiet hours of the night, during the long afternoons spent by the river, and even when she was surrounded by her family and friends. It was a voice that constantly asked, "Is this all there is?" It wasn't that she was unhappy exactly. Her village was a place many would describe as idyllic, a small, tight-knit community where everyone knew everyone else. The people were kind and generous, always willing to lend a helping hand. The land was fertile, with rolling hills and lush meadows stretching as far as the eye could see. Leona's family was warm and loving, and she had several close friends who she knew would stand by her no matter what. But despite all of this, something always seemed to be missing. There was a longing in her heart, a yearning for something more, something that her quiet village life didn't seem to offer. The village elders often spoke of contentment, of how happiness could be found in the simple things. They would sit in the town square, sipping tea and reminiscing about their long, fulfilled lives. They spoke of the joy that came from tending a garden, the satisfaction of hard work, the comfort of spending time with loved ones. And while Leona appreciated these things in her own way, the feeling that something was missing always lingered. It was as though a piece of her heart was still searching for its place in the world. Leona wasn't alone in feeling this way. Now and then, she would overhear other villagers, especially the younger ones, speaking in hushed tones about the wider world beyond their little corner of the earth. Travelers passing through sometimes spoke of distant lands filled with wonder and excitement. They spoke of bustling cities where the streets were filled with people from every walk of life, of vast oceans that stretched out beyond the horizon, and of forests so dense that sunlight barely touched the ground. But what intrigued Leona the most were the occasional whispers about the hidden village of happiness. It was said to be a place unlike any other, a village where everyone lived in perfect contentment. According to the rumors, the people there had no worries, no burdens. They didn't struggle with the small irritations of daily life. They didn't fret over the future or dwell on past mistakes. In the hidden village of happiness, life was simple, peaceful, and joyful. The more Leona heard about it, the more she became obsessed with the idea that this village might hold the key to the contentment she had been searching for all her life. No one seemed to know exactly where the village was, and those who claimed to have heard about it had little more than vague descriptions. Some said it was hidden deep in the mountains, others believed it lay beyond an impassable forest, and still others insisted it was on the far side of a wide river, only accessible to those who truly believed in its existence. But no matter how varied the accounts were, one thing was always the same. The people who lived in the hidden village of happiness were said to be truly content, living lives free from worry or dissatisfaction. The more Leona thought about it, the more restless she became. She began to feel as though the life she had been living was somehow lacking, that the happiness she thought she should feel was just out of reach. The idea of the hidden village consumed her thoughts, until she could no longer ignore the pull it had on her heart. One evening, as she sat by the river, watching the setting sun paint the sky with hues of orange and pink, she made a decision. She would leave her village and set out to find the hidden village of happiness. Leona didn't tell anyone about her decision, not even her closest friends or family. She knew they wouldn't understand. To them, life in the village was enough. They didn't feel the same restlessness she did, the same yearning for something more. They were content, happy even with their simple lives. And while Leona loved them dearly, she couldn't ignore the voice inside her that told her there was more out there waiting for her. The next morning, she packed her belongings, a few changes of clothes, some food, a map, and a small keepsake from her mother, and set out on the road that led out of the village. As she walked, the familiar sights of her home faded behind her, replaced by the open road and the unknown landscape ahead. Leona's heart beat with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. She had never traveled far from home before, and the journey ahead was uncertain. But the thought of finding the hidden village of happiness gave her the courage to keep moving forward. The road was long and winding, stretching through dense forests, across wide rivers, and over steep mountains. Days turned into weeks as Leona followed every lead she could find, asking travelers and villagers along the way if they had ever heard of the hidden village. Some had vague stories, passed down from generation to generation, while others had never heard of it at all. Still, Leona refused to give up. The thought of finding the village and finally understanding what it meant to be truly happy kept her going, even when the journey seemed impossible. There were times when doubt crept into her mind. What if the village didn't exist? What if it was just a story, a myth passed down to give people hope? What if she had left behind everything she knew for nothing? But whenever those thoughts threatened to overwhelm her, Leona pushed them aside. She had come too far to turn back now. One afternoon, after many weeks of travel, Leona found herself at the top of a steep hill. The climb had been difficult, the path rocky and uneven, but as she reached the summit, she saw something that made her heart skip a beat. There, nestled in the valley below, was a village unlike any she had ever seen. It was small, with tidy houses and well-tended gardens, and a river wound its way through the center, glistening in the sunlight. The air was filled with the sound of birdsong, and the people who moved through the streets did so with an ease and grace that seemed almost otherworldly. Leona's breath caught in her throat. Could this be it? The hidden village of happiness? She descended the hill quickly, her excitement growing with each step. As she neared the village, she saw the villagers going about their day, smiling and chatting with one another. Children played in the streets, their laughter filling the air, while older villagers sat on benches, enjoying the warm sunshine. There was an undeniable sense of peace here, a feeling that time moved slower, and the worries of the outside world had no place within these boundaries. As Leona entered the village, a man tending to his garden looked up and smiled at her. "Welcome," he said warmly, setting down his tools and wiping his hands on his apron. "You must be new here." Leona nodded, her voice catching in her throat. Is this the hidden village of happiness?" The man chuckled softly. "That's what some people call it," he said, his eyes crinkling with amusement. "But to us, it's just home." Leona felt a surge of relief. She had found it. After all the weeks of searching, after all the doubt and uncertainty, she had finally arrived at the village she had been dreaming of, the place where happiness wasn't just an ideal, but a way of life. Over the next few days, Leona explored the village, eager to learn more about the people who lived there and the secret to their happiness. The villagers were kind and welcoming, always eager to chat and share their stories. They lived simply, much like the people in her own village, but there was something different about them. They didn't seem to worry about the future, nor did they dwell on the past. They were content with the present moment, with the lives they had built for themselves. Leona spent her days wandering the village, admiring the beautiful gardens and the peaceful river that flowed through the center of town. The more time she spent there, the more she began to feel a sense of calm settling over her. It was as though the weight she had carried for so long, the restless yearning for something more, was beginning to lift. The villagers had a way of making everything seem so simple, so effortless. Their happiness wasn't tied to wealth or success or material possessions. It was rooted in something deeper, something that Leona couldn't quite put into words. But despite the peaceful atmosphere, despite the beauty of the village and the kindness of its people, Leona couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. She had come all this way in search of happiness, but she didn't feel the overwhelming sense of contentment she had expected. She felt calm, yes, and the village was certainly a beautiful place, but the nagging sense of incompleteness still lingered at the edges of her mind. One evening, as Leona sat by the river, watching the water flow gently over the rocks, an elderly woman approached her. The woman had a gentle smile and eyes that seemed to hold decades of wisdom. "You've been with us for a little while now," the woman said softly, sitting down beside her. "How are you finding our village?" Leona hesitated, unsure of how to put her feelings into words. "It's beautiful," she said slowly. "Everyone here seems so happy, but..." The woman nodded, as though she had heard this many times before. "But you don't feel the same way," she finished for her. Leona looked down at her hands, embarrassed by the truth of it. "I thought if I came here, I would finally understand what it means to be truly happy. But something still feels off, like I'm still searching for something." The old woman smiled kindly. "You're not the first to feel that way," she said. "Many people come here with the same hope, that this village will give them the happiness they've been searching for. But what they don't realize is that happiness isn't something you can find in a place or a situation. It's something you have to create within yourself." Leona frowned, confused by the woman's words. "What do you mean?" "Happiness isn't about where you are," the woman said gently. It's about how you see things. The people in this village aren't happy because they live in a perfect place. They're happy because they've learned to appreciate what they have. They don't chase after things they don't need. They don't look at what others have and think, if only I had that, I'd be happy. Instead, they focus on the small, simple things, the beauty of a sunrise, the joy of a shared meal, the kindness of a neighbor. They've learned that happiness isn't about having more. It's about appreciating what you already have. Leona sat in silence, absorbing the woman's words. She thought about her own village, about the life she had left behind. She had spent so much time believing that happiness was something she could find somewhere else, something that was always just out of reach. But now, sitting here in this peaceful village, she began to realize that she had been looking in the wrong place all along. Happiness wasn't something that could be found in a distant village or in the perfect set of circumstances. It was something that came from within, from appreciating the things you already had. But I left my village because I wasn't happy, Leona said quietly, more to herself than to the old woman. I thought this place would be different. The woman nodded, her smile never fading. Sometimes we have to leave what we know in order to see it more clearly, she said. Your journey was important, even if it didn't lead you to the happiness you were expecting. But now that you've found us, you have to decide what to do with what you've learned. Leona stared down at the river, watching the water flow over the smooth stones. She thought about her family, her friends, the simple life she had left behind. She had spent so much time yearning for something more, believing that the grass was greener on the other side. But maybe, just maybe, the grass had been just as green where she came from. She had just been too busy searching for something else to notice it. The next morning, Leona made her decision. She packed her belongings and prepared to leave the village. The villagers wished her well, their smiles warm and understanding. They didn't ask why she was leaving, nor did they try to convince her to stay. They seemed to understand that her journey wasn't over yet. As Leona walked away from the hidden village of happiness, she felt a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in a long time. The road ahead was long, and she would return to the same life she had left behind. But she knew that something had changed within her. She no longer felt the restlessness that had once plagued her. She no longer believed that happiness was something she could only find elsewhere. As she climbed the hills that led back to her village, Leona thought about the small things she had taken for granted. The laughter of her family, the comfort of her home, the familiar faces of her friends. She realized now that those things had been enough all along. She had simply needed to see them through different eyes. When she finally returned to her village, she was greeted with open arms. Her family welcomed her back with tears of joy, her friends eager to hear the stories of her journey. And as Leona sat down to a simple meal, surrounded by the people she loved, she felt a sense of contentment that she had never known before. The hidden village of happiness had taught her an important lesson. Happiness wasn't about having the perfect life. It wasn't about finding a place where everything was easy and free from struggle. It was about appreciating the beauty in the life you already had, about finding joy in the little things, and understanding that happiness was a choice, not a destination. Leona never forgot the lessons she had learned during her journey, but from that day forward, she no longer searched for happiness in far-off places or dreamed of a life different from the one she had. She had found happiness in the place she had always called home, where the grass was just as green as it had always been.